From the unmatched collection of the game's history in Cooperstown to a hidden gem like the Ted Williams Hitters Hall of Fame and Museum at Tropicana Field, there is a dedicated group of people who have made it their mission to preserve all things baseball. These exhibits are more than artifacts from a bygone era. They are snapshots in time that tell stories about on-field accomplishments and off-field exploits that help strengthen the bond between the game and its fans of all ages.
We're always interested in telling the stories of the immigrants that came to Ybor City and helped it flourish. And you really can't tell the immigrant story of Ybor City without talking about baseball.
Collecting baseballs is just like collecting cards. It's something people do, and I got that guy's signature on this ball, my hero, you know, something, and I like preserving it.
It's so much more interesting, I think, especially for the young people that come in here, to see all the teams, not just one team or not just one player, and to learn about really the whole history of baseball. It's part of America, that's what it is. And I think there's nothing more American than probably baseball.
It's very common to have multiple generations of families coming through, grandparents, parents, and children, and you hope that we start a conversation, that something is learned, that common thread of baseball helps bind those generations together.
The story of Abner Doubleday inventing baseball in Cooperstown, New York in 1839 has long been debunked, but the Hall of Fame and Museum that opened here in the summer of 1939 has never let that fact get in the way of its mission. The stewards of this shrine to the game's greatest players and its complex and colorful history tend to think of that tall tale as just another compelling piece of the story.
Baseball wasn't invented anywhere. It evolved out of cricket and rounders, certainly had early beginnings in the Northeast in a rural community such as Cooperstown, so that while we're not where baseball was invented, and it wasn't invented anywhere, we're certainly a reasonable landscape of how the game might have been invented.
What began as a one-room gallery of plaques has morphed into three entities under one much larger roof.
We're a museum and library where we preserve and collect the game's history. We're a thriving education center where we connect with classrooms around the country every day in all 50 states over the course of a year. And we're a Hall of Fame that salutes the game's greatest contributors.
Probably have over 40,000 sort of three-dimensional objects, bat, ball, gloves, that kind of thing, not including baseball cards, of which we have well over 100,000 baseball cards. But 40,000 objects, we're talking about 7,000 plus baseballs, 1,000 uniforms, over 500 baseball caps, and that's just sort of the obvious artifacts.
What people probably don't realize also is that we're a not-for-profit, we're a 501c3. We're not an arm of Major League Baseball, but we have a great relationship with them. So every piece that's in this museum has been donated. The museum's not in a financial position to buy artifacts, so the nearly 50,000 pieces in our museum, 3 million pieces in our library have all been donated.
If I go into a Major League clubhouse now, say World Series or All-Star game, and explain what we do and that we're the Baseball Hall of Fame, we're trying to preserve this history. Players are donating their items to us so we can continue to tell the stories of baseball.
We need to continue to grow, and just because we have a wonderful collection doesn't mean that we're done collecting. Baseball history is happening every day, and we need to make sure we document that.
When we're planning for a visitor to come here, you obviously want them to have a wonderful experience. They're stepping back in time, they're stepping back into their own time. And you hope that some part of the museum relates to everybody who comes through, and it does. It's uncanny how everybody has a special moment seemingly to be represented here.
That includes fans of all 30 Major League teams, even the ones like the Rays, with relatively brief histories.
On our second floor, what we call the locker room, where we have 30 cases that look like baseball lockers, and they're full of artifacts from about the last 10 years or so of that club's history. Not necessarily the current players, guys could have left the club, but it's about each club's recent history. And we certainly have a number of artifacts from the Rays there. Obviously their success going into the 2008 World Series, the American League pennant winners. but also highlight moments as well. Matt Garza's no-hitter, so runs the gamut.
With a massive collection that grows larger almost daily, one of the biggest challenges facing the Cooperstown staff is storing and preserving all of these items, many of which are kept in a secure area not accessible to the public.
So we're in what we call collection storage, and this is where we store artifacts that are not currently on exhibit. We can't exhibit everything. We don't have enough space, time, money, staff, the big four. So things need to be kept in a climate-controlled area. That's what we have here. So we have a number of objects that we've pulled out. Normally everything is boxed up and in storage. That's the correct way to preserve these objects, but pulled some items out to give people a feel for the breadth and the depth of the collection, the kinds of things that we collect, and sometimes there's some surprising artifacts, sometimes it's sort of straight ahead, more obvious items. I'll give you an example here. This bat, which is, as you can see, partially broken, but this is the bat that was used by Tony Gwynn to get his 3,000th Major League hit. And he signed it, but more importantly, this is the one that really did the deed. We also have some Tampa Bay Rays artifacts that we pulled out. This cap right here is the cap that Matt Garza wore for the no-hitter he pitched in July of 2010. And the jersey you're seeing here is a jersey worn by Rolando Araujo in '98 in the All-Star game. And finally, an artifact that we just got in, Evan Longoria's helmet from when he hit for the cycle in early August against the Astros in Houston. Only the second Rays player to hit for the cycle. So, we're constantly trying to keep up with what's happening in baseball today, because what's happening in baseball today is baseball history the next day.
After nearly 80 years, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum is still drawing fans from around the world to this out-of-the-way spot in upstate New York. Despite all of the things we have to attract and distract us in the 21st century, this priceless collection of everything baseball still manages to capture the imagination of young and old alike.
It's very common to have multiple generations of families coming through, grandparents, parents, and children, and you hope that we start a conversation, that something is learned, that common thread of baseball helps bind those generations together.
I'd like to think that everyone that comes here just feels a greater connection to the all-time greats of our game. And really the stories that connect America and our country's development with baseball history.
Whether it's the first spring training game in 1914 or the arrival of its very own Major League team in 1998, St. Petersburg's connection to baseball is almost as old as the city itself. It's that history that's made exhibits focusing on the game a natural for the St. Petersburg Museum of History since its founding nearly a century ago.
In the beginning, we're primarily a fishing agricultural town, became a tourist town, but man, the day that the Yankees arrived for spring training, and Babe Ruth arrived, and the newsreels and the reporters and the newspapers all followed him, you can't buy that kind of advertising. So from the marketing, tourism, growth part, baseball has been huge for St. Petersburg on that end of it.
That impact is felt by just about everyone, including a young boy who stumbles upon what would become a lifelong obsession while helping the Yankees bat boys during spring training in the mid-50s.
Collecting baseballs is just like collecting cards. It's something people do, and I got that guy's signature on this ball, my hero, something, and I like preserving it. I was collecting since I was 9 years old. Mickey Mantle gave me my first ball, and I had a house with a vault in it. It was built for a collector who collected guns, and it was huge, 12 foot by 14 foot. So I took these out of the boxes after years when I moved and started displaying them in the vault, and people would come by, wow, this is real. So I started writing to people, and it got bigger and it got bigger. So I wrote to the Guinness Book of Records. Took about 2.5 to 3 years. I got the Guinness Book of Records in 2011 with over 4,000 autographed balls.
That's when the size of the collection and its notoriety becomes more than he can handle on his own. With the help of city officials, the St. Petersburg Museum of History agrees to house the collection, a commitment that would require several years of planning before Schrader's Little Cooperstown could open to the public.
Here's the real challenge you have with any kind of exhibit, especially a saturated exhibit, and not in a negative term, but just when it's primarily baseball. Well, what about those guests that don't love baseball? And, well, my approach was to design different features within the exhibit that allow non-baseball lovers to explore and actually get connected with baseball.
Good museums do a really good job of telling stories. And I think it was important that we just didn't have 5,000 baseballs stacked up for people to look at and go ooh and ah when they see, the autographs.
On the timeline you look, you see 1950s, you're going to see Mickey Mantle breaking records, you're going to see the uprise of the Korean conflict, you're going to see locally, you're going to see the first Sunshine Skyway Bridge is built, and nationally, Disneyland opens up. These are little key points that I think non-sports lovers may trigger them emotionally in connecting themselves in a historical context and in a baseball history context as well.
What I like about it is the fans coming to the Rays game can see it. Across the water right here is the Vinoy, where players stay. Boston was here, the Red Sox, and this place was full of Boston Red Sox shirts because they did a little hit on this and put it on the Boston station.
Schrader's passion for getting that next autographed ball is still as strong as ever, which means this display is constantly evolving.
To me, that's the fun part of this exhibit, because when you look at most exhibits in museums, especially exhibits that are permanent or semi-permanent, once they're built, they're built. This is a living exhibit.
Sometimes you'll see a guest come in as early as we open the doors, so 10:01 they're walking in, and you'll leave for lunch at 1 o'clock and they're still here exploring and recounting and recalling memories, especially with other guests that are with them. For example, oh my gosh, I recall this day, this player did this, and so it really becomes almost their own storytelling exhibit, if you will.
Every now and then you say, when do I stop? When do I stop? I'm getting close to 5,000. I'm almost there. I want to find somebody famous, maybe in baseball, maybe not. There's balls in here that aren't baseball players. An actor, an actress, a politician, somebody that'll draw a crowd in here to sign that 5,000th ball. Will I quit at 5,000, which is right around the corner? Probably not.
In 1885, Vicente Martinez Ybor came to Tampa to establish the cigar industry. And in doing so, he obviously brought the Cuban cigar makers there. Eventually, he brought Italians and Spaniards who also came to work either in the cigar industry or in support of the community.
Baseball became a way that everybody could sort of communicate without language, in an essence. And baseball wasn't something that was terribly popular anywhere but in the United States and really in Cuba at the time that the cigar industry was founded. So the Cuban immigrants were really responsible for making baseball super popular in Tampa, and they sort of taught it to Spanish immigrants and to Italian immigrants who weren't at all familiar with the game, and I think really helped bolster its popularity in this area.
Almost 100 years after Ybor City is founded, a group of like-minded residents decide it's time to officially preserve the history and cultural diversity of their neighborhood.
In 1980, a new museum opened called the Ybor City Museum State Park. Some of our citizens had gone to Tallahassee to ask the state park system to preserve what was an Italian bakery, which they did, and they made it into a history museum about the cigar industry and the immigrant groups who came to Ybor City.
We're always interested in telling the stories of the immigrants that came to Ybor City and helped it flourish. And you really can't tell the immigrant story of Ybor City without talking about baseball.
It is in our DNA here in Tampa and in Ybor City. It's just a sport that just about everyone who was born here at some point played in a little league organization, went to a spring training game. It's something that flows along with the history of the city.
The list of players that have come from Tampa and gone on to the major leagues is impressive. But the man who was the first to accomplish that feat may still be its most prominent.
Obviously, Al Lopez was important because he led the way for everyone else. He was the first major league player from Tampa, the first to be inducted in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and the second a Latino to be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
So, when the Ybor City Museum Society gets the chance to take possession of Al Senior's childhood home, it jumps at the chance to turn it into the Tampa Baseball Museum at the Al Lopez House. But committing to a costly historic preservation is no small task.
This project could not get off the ground until a suitable location was identified for the house. So the county first approved a 60-year land lease where the house was relocated to, right in the heart of the National Landmark District.
When you were given that opportunity to acquire the house, that it just made sense. That's what you should do with it, and it should be a museum. And I do agree, if we just started from scratch, brick and mortar, built our own building and housed the artifacts, I don't know if it would have the same importance to the visitor.
When you look at pictures of the house in the time when Al Lopez was living in it, and you look at what it looks like now, it almost looks the same. And that's really what our architect that we brought on for the project, that was his main goal, was to make sure that we stayed as historically accurate to what that house always looked like.
Now that the renovations are complete, the final step is building the exhibits that will tell the story of Al Lopez and the rich history of baseball in Tampa he helped create.
So clearly he's sort of the godfather or the grandfather of baseball in the Ybor City community, and we're in his house on top of that. So he's clearly going to be an inspirational figure, but we just want to use him as a jumping off point for telling the rest of the story of baseball in Tampa.
The exhibits will be laid out in a form of discovery. So you will meander through the museum to discover sort of a chronology of Tampa's baseball history. It'll start with the early leagues, such as the cigar factory leagues and the social clubs, all the way through the first minor league team, the Tampa Smokers. It'll include Little League, American Legion, the high school and the college teams, and then we have a special place that'll be for the future, and we will have a flex exhibit that will change frequently. I mean, we have 10 years worth of topics that we could cover without even blinking twice.
Projects like the Al Lopez House strengthens our community's identity, fosters historic preservation, and builds cultural assets that support education, tourism, and economic development.
He wasn't just a great baseball player, he was a great American. He had 39 combat missions. He was John Glenn's wingman over in Korea. He served in World War II as well as Korea, so that's 4 prime years of his life that he was gone from baseball, and yet he retired with a lifetime .344 average, which is unheard of. So, and not only that, the last man that hit over 400. No one's done it since.
He was the best hitter on our team. I'm guessing he was in his late 50s. And we had spring training in Pompano, and incredible. Dude could hit. And we'd have that wind coming, the wind meant nothing to him. And every chance I got, I just stood right next to him, tried to listen to every word he said.
He was known as the Kid, the Splendid Splinter, and Teddy Ballgame. But for Theodore Samuel Williams, the only moniker that mattered was the greatest hitter that ever lived. Long after he retires, Williams' appreciation for the art of hitting is as strong as ever. So when he's presented with the concept of his own Hitters Hall of Fame in Hernando, Florida, he jumps at the idea.
It was a gorgeous building. They added a wing on because Ted said he would only do it if they honored the other ball players. So there was a Hitters Hall of Fame wing, and he wouldn't allow himself, here he is the greatest hitter, to be inducted into it. He wanted to give the glory to the other players. Well, Ted passed away in 2002. And once that happened, I knew there was going to be a problem because it's just so far out of the way from, the standard tourist area.
That's when McCarthy has a chance meeting with the Rays that leads to the museum relocating to Tropicana Field.
I believe it was fate because there were several places around the country, including Fenway Park, that were interested in maybe doing something down the road, but there was nothing imminent. And we're a charity, and we had to survive, and having all this space here at the Trop, and really a place to not only have a history of the Rays, but a history of all baseball. They had plenty of room, so it was really it was a match made in heaven. It was great.
I spoke with Stuart Sternberg, our owner, about that, and said we had this opportunity to bring a ton of great baseball memorabilia into our home stadium. And was he interested? We were very interested, and a great partnership was built from there.
Every year we induct new players into the Ted Williams Hitters Hall of Fame and the museum, and I'll explain. The Hitters Hall of Fame, we just had Pete Rose and Willie Horton inducted. But we also have the Ted Williams Museum, where we have everything from Kevin Kiermaier's Gold Glove to Big Poppy's last bat. You name it, we have it. It's all a part of baseball history.
Whatever that piece is, whether it's that your dad grew up loving Johnny Bench and you can come here and see the jersey that he wore, or that you've heard all these stories about the last guy to hit 400 and so you want to check out the museum in his honor, there's something for everyone, and it provides this really great connection to the game of baseball. And of course, that's what we're trying to build here with the Rays.
It's so much more interesting, I think, especially for the young people that come in here, to see all the teams, not just one team or not just one player, and to learn about really the whole history of baseball. It's part of America. That's what it is. And I think there's nothing more American than probably baseball.
And while the preservation of these artifacts from a game that is rooted in myths and magical moments is the foundation of these museums, it's the memories they stir, those priceless moments that connects each of us to baseball in a uniquely personal way.
It's important for us to be able to tell those stories, not only about Babe Ruth and the great players of the early 1900s and late 1800s, but all the way up to today. The stories of today are going to be the history of tomorrow and future generations.
There's a great history to our game, and that the names are eternal. We're one of the few sports, if the only sport, where you still remember players from the 1800s or the 1900s. And the records leave an indelible mark on your mind.
People are there because they want to remember what happens when they're there. They want to re-experience with their kids what they went through with their parents. And memorabilia is just kind of a physical way of capturing that sentiment. And it's a sentiment that I think is ingrained in the game of baseball, and that makes baseball really special and unique compared to all other sports.